This is the moment where I sing a song and dance and hope everything is working. La di da 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 da. Well, I guess the way to do it is, yeah, pull up my own link. I think YouTube doesn't like live streaming anymore. They hide it from me. I'm never sure if it's actually working. Okay. Okay, I see it, but I can't see the live stream chat. So is that part working? There it is, live. Then I want to make sure I can see the live stream chat. Okay, I'm here. All right. Sweet. Okay, no one in the chat yet. This is a completely impromptu stream. I literally was just looking at this book, The Princess and the Goblin by George MacDonald, illustrated by Okama, and I thought, I remember that George MacDonald was like older than C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, and he was one of the first members of the Inklings. So I looked up Wikipedia and I realized, oh, he's a lot older than C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. He is in public domain territory. So, well, at first I was thinking, oh, I'll do like a little review of the art, and I just realized, wait a second, I could read this whole book if I want to. I could turn this into a storybook time with Uncle Marmaduke fan. So hopefully the cats won't meow and interrupt. But this is going to be a casual storybook time. So I am collecting these because I'm a weeb and I love the art. Okama, I'm guessing, is a Japanese studio. I've previously showed off a Japanese edition of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, illustrated by the same team. This edition is in English, and I got it from Canada. So if you guys have any questions about the art, I can do some commentary on the art as I go, but the text of the story itself is from the 1800s. So without further ado, let's begin in this trying election time. I offer you some just cozy weeb art. Let's enjoy some of the weeb art. So there's an illustration without any of the title information on the page. I have some childhood memories of the movie based on this book by Warner Brothers. I loved it as a little kid. I did read this book, I think, in high school when I became interested in C.S. Lewis and the Inklings. They have a nice little map, including the underground and character profiles. And I don't like the way Okama illustrates hands too much, but overall, it's a very sweet style that's a good fit for the genre. And I like how they sort of look at the text of the story and they try to figure out what genre of readers it would best appeal to, and they kind of match the illustration style to that genre. Anyway, so I read it in high school, and I was impressed by it. It's denser language and maybe more old school English than Lewis or even Tolkien used. So it's not the easiest for very young readers, I think, in kind of using modern English, but he does contextualize things for children well, and I'm going to comment more on his narration style as I go. Looks like we've got a couple people in the chat, so let's go ahead and look at some of these beautiful pictures. I like how they bring sort of like a simple, cute Japanese style to the fantasy creatures. Chapter 1. Why the Princess Has a Story About Her. There once was a little princess whose father was king over a great country full of mountains and valleys. His palace was built upon one of the mountains and was very grand and beautiful. The princess, whose name was Irene, was born there, but she was sent soon after her birth because her mother was not very strong, to be brought up by country people in a large house, half castle, half farmhouse, on the side of another mountain, about halfway between its base and its peak. The princess was a sweet little creature, and at the time my story begins was about 8 years old, I think, but she got older very fast. Her face was fair and pretty, with eyes like two bits of night sky, each with a star dissolved in the blue. Those eyes, you would have thought, must have known that they came from there. So often were they turned up in that direction. The ceiling of her nursery was blue, with stars in it, as like the sky as they could make it. But I doubt if ever she saw the real sky with the stars in it, for a reason which I had better mention at once. These mountains were full of hollow places underneath, huge caverns and winding ways, some with water running through them, and some shining with all colors of the rainbow when a light was taken in. There would not have been much known about them had there not been mines there, great deep pits with long galleries and passages running off from them, which had been dug to get at the ore, of which the mountains were full. In the course of digging, the miners came upon many of these natural caverns. A few of them had far-off openings on the outside. A few of them had far-off openings out on the side of a mountain or into a ravine. Now in these subterranean caverns lived a strange race of beings, called by some gnomes, by some kobolds, by some goblins. There was a legend current in the country that at one time they lived above ground and were very like other people. But for some reason or other, concerning which there were different legendary theories, the king had laid what they thought too severe taxes upon them, or had required observances of them they did not like, or had begun to treat them with more severity, in some way or other, and impose stricter laws. And the consequence was that they had all disappeared from the face of the country. According to the legend, however, instead of going to some other country, they had all taken refuge in the subterranean caverns, whence they never came out but at night, and then seldom showed themselves in any numbers and never to many people at once. It was only in the least frequented and most difficult parts of the mountains that they were ever said to gather, even at night in the open air. Those who had caught sight of any of them said that they had greatly altered in the course of generations, and no wonder, seeing they lived away from the sun in cold and wet and dark places. They were now not ordinarily ugly, but either absolutely hideous or ludicrously grotesque, both in face and form. There was no invention, they said, of the most lawless imagination expressed by pen or pencil that could surpass the extravagance of their appearance. But I suspect those who said so had mistaken some of their animal companions for the goblins themselves, of which more by and by. The goblins themselves were not so far removed from the humans as such a description would imply. As they grew misshapen in body, they had grown in knowledge and cleverness, and now were able to do things no mortal could see the possibility of. But as they grew in cunning, they grew in mischief, and their great delight was in every way they could think of to annoy the people who lived in the open-air story above them. They had enough of affection left for each other to preserve them from being absolutely cruel for cruelty's sake to those that came in their way. But still, they so heartily cherished their ancestral grudge against those who occupied their former possessions, and especially against the descendants of the king, who had caused their expulsion, that they sought every opportunity of tormenting them in ways that were as odd as their inventors. And although dwarfed and misshapen, they had strength equal to their cunning. In the process of time, they had got a king and a government of their own, whose chief business, beyond their own simple affairs, was to devise trouble for their neighbors. It will now be pretty evident why the little princess had never seen the sky at night. They were much too afraid of the goblins to let her out of the house then, even in company with ever so many attendants. And they had good reason, as we shall see by and by. Stylized Circus Baby is here. Love the narration. Thank you, Stylized Circus Baby. That's chapter 1. Okay, I'm going to offer a little commentary on the chapters as I go for book club. I love how the illustrators are picking up on narrative cues. It's even interesting because George MacDonald will sometimes describe how an artist couldn't possibly capture something that he's describing verbally. So he kind of describes what some people think the goblins are as impossibly grotesque, like beyond the imagination. But then he kind of counters that by saying, well, that was an exaggeration. They weren't quite as bad as that. I like how the goblins have kind of a cutish design, like monstrous, but maybe kind of like takes a little bit of the threatening aura away from them. In chapter 2, we'll hear more about this illustration in chapter 2. The princess loses herself. I have said the Princess Irene was about 8 years old when my story begins, and this is how it begins. One very wet day, when the mountain was covered with mist, which was constantly gathering itself together into raindrops and pouring down on the roofs of the great old house, whence it fell in a fringe of water from the eaves all round about it, The princess could not, of course, go out. She got very tired, so tired that even her toys could no longer amuse her. You would wonder at that if I had time to describe to you one half the toys she had. But then you wouldn't have the toys themselves, and that makes all the difference. You can't get tired of a thing before you have it. It was a picture, though, worth seeing. The princess sitting in the nursery with the sky ceiling over her head at a great table covered with her toys. If the artist would like to draw this, I should advise him not to meddle with the toys. I am afraid of attempting to describe them, and I think he had better not try to draw them. He had better not. He can do 1,000 things I can't, but I don't think he could draw those toys. No man could better make the princess herself than he could, though. Leaning with her back bowed into the back of the chair, her head hanging down and her hands in her lap, very miserable, as she would say herself, not even knowing what she would like, except it were to go out and get thoroughly wet and catch a particularly nice cold and have to go to bed and take gruel. The next moment after you see her sitting there, her nurse goes out of the room. Even that is a change, and the princess wakes up a little and looks about her. Then she tumbles off her chair and runs out of the door, not the same door the nurse went out of, but one which opened at the foot of a curious old stair of worm-eaten oak, which looked as if never anyone had set foot upon it. She had once before been up 6 steps, and that was sufficient reason, in such a day, for trying to find out what was at the top of it. Up and up she ran, such a long way it seemed to her, until she came to the top of the 3rd flight. There she found the landing was the end of a long passage. Into this she ran. It was full of doors on each side. There were so many that she did not care to open any, but ran on to the end, where she turned into another passage, also full of doors. When she had turned twice more, and still saw doors and only doors about her, she began to get frightened. It was so silent, and all those doors must hide rooms with nobody in them. That was dreadful. Also the rain made a great trampling noise on the roof. She turned and started at full speed, her little footsteps echoing through the sounds of the rain, back for the stairs and her safe nursery. So she thought, but she had lost herself long ago. It doesn't follow, though, that she was lost because she had lost herself, though. She ran for some distance, turned several times, and then began to be afraid. Very soon she was sure that she had lost the way back. Rooms everywhere, and no stair. Her little heart beat as fast as her little feet ran, and a lump of tears was growing in her throat, but she was too eager and perhaps too frightened to cry for some time. At last her hope failed her. Nothing but passages and doors everywhere. She threw herself on the floor and burst into a wailing cry, broken by sobs. She did not cry long, however, for she was as brave as could be expected of a princess of her age. After a good cry, she got up and brushed the dust from her frock. Oh, what old dust it was! Then she wiped her eyes with her hands, for princesses don't always have their handkerchiefs in their pockets, any more than some other little girls I know of. Next, like a true princess, she resolved on going wisely to work to find her way back. She would walk through the passages and look in every direction for the stair. This she did, but without success. She went over the same ground again and again without knowing it, for the passages and doors were all alike. At last, in a corner, through a half-open door, she did see a stair, but alas, it went the wrong way. Instead of going down, it went up. Frightened as she was, however, she could not help wishing to see where yet further the stair could lead. It was very narrow, and so steep that she went on like a 4-legged creature on her hands and feet. Chapter 3. I love how the artist picked up her having to crawl up on her hands and feet. That was neat. It was also really fun how he described how no artist could possibly capture all the toys. Kind of like so clearly, like he had, because he's writing for children, he's thinking in word pictures, and then the artist literally illustrated that scene, but went ahead and added the toys anyway to give us an idea of their magnificence. And I even like that the toys are very modern toys. It's sort of like they're very lightly modernizing it in the illustrations to help connect to a very young reader. I'm really enjoying it so far. Chapter 3, The Princess and we shall see who. When she came to the top, she found herself in a little square place with 3 doors, 2 opposite each other and 1 opposite the top of the stair. She stood for a moment without an idea in her little head what to do next. But as she stood, she began to hear a curious humming sound. Could it be the rain? No. It was much more gentle and even monotonous than the sound of the rain, which now she scarcely heard. The low, sweet humming sound went on, sometimes stopping for a little while and then beginning again. It was more like the hum of a very happy bee that had found a rich well of honey in some globular flower than anything else I can think of at this moment. Where could it come from? She laid her ear first to one of the doors to hearken if it were there, then to another. When she laid her ear against the 3rd door, there could be no doubt where it came from. It must be from something in that room. What could it be? She was rather afraid, but her curiosity was stronger than her fear, and she opened the door very gently and peeped in. What do you think she saw? A very old lady who sat spinning. Perhaps you will wonder how the princess could tell that the old lady was an old lady when I inform you that not only was she beautiful, but her skin was smooth and white. I will tell you more. Her hair was combed back from her forehead and face and hung loose far down and all over her back. That is not much like an old lady, is it? Ah, but it was white, almost as snow, and although her face was so smooth, her eyes looked so wise that you could not have helped seeing she must be old. The princess, though she could not have told you why, did think her very old indeed. Quite 50, she said to herself, but she was rather older than that, as you shall hear. While the princess stared bewildered with her head just inside the door, the old lady lifted hers and said in a sweet but old and rather shaky voice, which mingled very presently with the continued hum of her wheel, "Come in, my dear, come in. I am glad to see you." That the princess was a real princess you might see now quite plainly, for she didn't hang on to the handle of the door and stare without moving, as I have known some do who ought to have been princesses, but were only rather vulgar little girls. She did as she was told, stepped inside the door at once, and shut it gently behind her. "Come to me, my dear," said the old lady, and again the princess did as she was told. She approached the old lady, rather slowly, I confess, but did not stop until she stood by her side and looked up in her face with her blue eyes and the 2 melted stars in them. "Why, what have you been doing with your eyes, child?" asked the old lady. "Crying," answered the princess. "Why, child?" "Because I couldn't find my way down again." "But you could find your way up." "Not at first, not for a long time." "But your face is streaked like the back of a zebra. Hadn't you a handkerchief to wipe your eyes with?" "No." "Then why don't you come with me to wipe them for you?" Please, I didn't know you were here. I will next time." "There's a good child," said the old lady. Then she stopped her wheel and rose, and going out of the room, returned with a little silver basin and a soft white towel, with which she washed and wiped the bright little face. And the princess thought her hands were so smooth and nice. When she carried away the basin and towel, the little princess wondered to see how straight and tall she was, for although she was so old, she didn't stoop a bit. She was dressed in black velvet, with thick, white, heavy-looking lace about it, and on the black dress her hair shone like silver. There was hardly any more furniture in the room than there might have been in that of the poorest old woman who made her bread by her spinning. There was no carpet on the floor, no table anywhere, nothing but the spinning wheel and the chair beside it. When she came back, she sat down and without a word began her spinning once more, while Irene, who had never seen a spinning wheel, stood by her side and looked on. When the old lady had got her thread fairly going again, she said to the princess, but without looking at her, "Do you know my name, child?" "No, I don't know it," answered the princess. "My name is Irene." "That's my name!" cried the princess. "I know that. I let you have mine. I haven't got your name. You've got mine." "How can that be?" asked the princess, bewildered. "I've always had my name." "Your papa, the king, asked me if I had any objection to your having it, and of course I hadn't. I let you have it with pleasure." "It was very kind of you to give me your name, and such a pretty one," said the princess. "Oh, not so very kind," said the old lady. "A name is one of those things one can give away and keep all the same. I have a good many such things. Wouldn't you like to know who I am, child?" "Yes, that I should, very much." "I'm your great-great-grandmother," said the lady. "What's that?" asked the princess. "I'm your father's mother's father's mother." "Oh dear, I can't understand that," said the princess. "I dare say not. I didn't expect you would, but that's no reason why I shouldn't say it." "Oh no," answered the princess. "I will explain it all to you when you are older," the lady went on, but you will be able to understand this much now. I came here to take care of you." Is it long since you came? Was it yesterday? Or was it today? Because it was so wet that I couldn't get out?" "I've been here ever since you came yourself." "What a long time," said the princess. "I don't remember it at all." "No, I suppose not." "But I never saw you before." "No, but you shall see me again." "Do you live in this room always?" "I don't sleep in it. I sleep on the opposite side of the landing. I sit here most of the day." "I shouldn't like it. My nursery is much prettier. You must be a queen too, if you are my great-big-grandmother." "Yes, I am a queen." "Where is your crown, then?" "In my bedroom." "I should like to see it." "You shall some day. Not today." "I wonder why Nursey never told me." "Nursey doesn't know. She never saw me." "But somebody knows that you were in the house." "No, nobody." "How do you get dinner, then?" "I keep poultry, of a sort." "Where do you keep them?" I will show you." "And who makes the chicken broth for you?" "I never kill any of my chickens." "Then I can't understand." "What did you have for breakfast this morning?" asked the lady. "Oh, I had bread and milk and an egg. I dare say you eat their eggs." "Yes, that's it. I eat their eggs." Oop, we got a comment. Snuff. What? That looks like a spam comment. All right, we might be getting some robots in the chat. Anyway, so that was the old lady. Then young Irene speaks. "Is that what makes your hair so white?" "No, my dear. It's old age. I am very old." "I thought so. Are you 50? "Yes, more than that." "Are you 100? "Yes, more than that. I am too old for you to guess. Come and see my chickens." Again she stopped her spinning. She rose, took the princess by the hand, led her out of the room, and opened the door opposite the stair. The princess expected to see a lot of hens and chickens, but instead of that, she saw the blue sky first, and then the roofs of the house, with a multitude of the loveliest pigeons, mostly white, but of all colors, walking about, making bows to each other, and talking a language she could not understand. She clapped her hands with delight, and up rose such a flapping of wings that she in turn was startled. "You frightened my poultry," said the old lady, smiling. "And they frightened me," said the princess, smiling too. "But what very nice poultry! Are the eggs nice?" "Yes, very nice." "What a small egg spoon you must have! Wouldn't it be better to keep hens and get bigger eggs?" "How should I feed them, though?" "I see," said the princess. "The pigeons feed themselves. They've got wings." "Just so. If they couldn't fly, I couldn't eat their eggs. But how do you get at the eggs? Where are their nests? The lady took hold of a little loop of string in the wall at the side of the door, and, lifting a shutter, showed a great many pigeonholes with nests, some with young ones, and some with eggs in them. The birds came in at the other side, and she took out the eggs on this side. She closed it again quickly, lest the young ones should be frightened. "Oh, what a nice way!" cried the princess. "Will you give me an egg to eat? I'm rather hungry." "I will some day, but now you must go back, or Nursey will be miserable about you. I dare say she's looking for you everywhere." "Except here," answered the princess. "Oh, how surprised she will be when I tell her about my great big grandmother." "Yes, that she will," said the old lady with a curious smile. "Mind you tell her all about it exactly." "That I will. Please, will you take me back to her?" "I can't go all the way, but I will take you to the top of the stair, and then you must run down quite fast into your own room." The little princess put her hand into the old lady's, who, looking this way and that, brought her to the top of the first stair, and thence to the bottom of the second, and did not leave her till she saw her halfway down the third. When she heard the cry of her nurse's pleasure at finding her, she turned and walked up the stairs again, very fast indeed, for such a very great grandmother, and sat down to her spinning, with another strange smile on her sweet old face. About this spinning of hers, I will tell you more another time. Guess what she was spinning? That's the end. Okay, I want to comment a bit. So, it's written in a conversational style. The George MacDonald makes sort of wry comments about little girls that he knows and how they're not as polite as the princess. And look at this. This is a direct question or challenge to the reader. So this is written by someone who wants to read aloud to children and get their feedback on the story. And he also really understands children. Young Irene is like a precocious child. She understands a lot of things, but there are some concepts she can't grasp. She can't quite grasp the concept of a great-great-grandmother. So she describes her as a great big grandmother. This is a thing where when the movie changed her to a teenager, this element was lost. Irene is at a very young age where she's a little cooped up and she's still forming her view of the world. Eight-year-old is an age where you're intelligent enough to understand that you're young and small and vulnerable, like you're scared of monsters under the bed, but you haven't sort of developed, like the critical thinking skills of that a teenager has. So she's being 8 years old and obviously living in a world with goblins in it. She's in a very dangerous world and she's being protected and hidden from that. And when she meets the old lady, she's sort of entering into this magical realm. Okay, I think I'm going to do chapter 4. How many chapters are there? I kind of want to maybe do it maybe by subdivision. There are about 32 chapters. I want to do 5 chapters at least. I think that'll be a good chunk for the day. Chapter 4. What the nurse thought of it. Why, where could... I want to give her a distinct voice. So she's a big middle-aged lady. "Why, where could you have been, princess?" asked the nurse, taking her in her arms. "It's very unkind of you to hide away so long. I began to be afraid." Here, she checked herself. "What were you afraid of, Nursey?" asked the princess. "Never mind," she answered. "Perhaps I will tell you another day. Now, tell me where you have been." "I've been up a long way to see my very great, huge old grandmother," said the princess. She's adorable. "What do you mean by that?" asked the nurse, who thought she was making fun. "I mean that I've been a long way up and up to see my great-grandmother. Ah, Nursey, you don't know what a beautiful mother of grandmothers I've got upstairs. She is such an old lady with such lovely white hair, as white as my silver cup. Now, when I think of it, I think her hair must be silver." "What nonsense you are talking, princess," said the nurse. "I'm not talking nonsense," returned Irene, rather offended. I will tell you all about her. She's much taller than you, and much prettier." "Oh, I dare say," remarked the nurse. "And she lives upon pigeons' eggs." "Most likely," said the nurse. and she sits in an empty room, spinning all day long. Not a doubt of it, said the nurse. And she keeps her crown in her bedroom. Of course, quite the proper place to keep her crown in. She wears it in bed, I'll be bound. She didn't say that, and I don't think she does. That wouldn't be comfortable, would it? I don't think my papa wears his crown for a nightcap. Does he, Nursey? I never asked him. I dare say he does. And she's been there ever since I came here, ever so many years. Anybody could have told you that, said the nurse, who did not believe a word Irene was saying. Why didn't you tell me then? I want to make sure, George MacDonald doesn't always indicate who's speaking, so I just want to make sure I don't get mixed up. Okay. Why didn't you tell me then? There was no necessity. You could make it all up for yourself. You don't believe me then, exclaimed the princess, astonished and angry, as she might well be. Did you expect me to believe you, princess? Asked the nurse coldly. I know princesses are in the habit of telling make-believes, but you are the first I ever heard of who expected to have them believed, she added, seeing that the child was strangely in earnest. The princess burst into tears. Well, I must say, remarked the nurse, now thoroughly vexed with her for crying, it is not at all becoming in a princess to tell stories and expect to be believed, just because she is a princess. But it's quite true, I tell you. You've dreamt it then, child. No, I didn't dream it. I went upstairs and I lost myself, and if I hadn't found the beautiful lady, I should never have found myself. Oh, I dare say. Well, you just come up with me and see if I'm not telling the truth. Indeed, I have other work to do. It's your dinner time, and I won't have any more such nonsense. The princess wiped her eyes, and her face grew so hot that they were soon quite dry, and she sat down to her dinner, but ate next to nothing. Not to be believed does not at all agree with princesses, for a real princess cannot tell a lie. So all the afternoon she did not speak a word. Only when the nurse spoke to her, she answered her, for a real princess is never rude, even when she does well to be offended. Of course, the nurse was not comfortable in her mind. Not that she suspected the least truth in Irene's story, but that she loved her dearly, and was vexed with herself for having been cross to her. She thought her crossness was the cause of the princess's unhappiness, and had no idea that she was really and deeply hurt at not being believed. But as it became more and more plain during the evening, in her every motion and look, that, although she tried to amuse herself with her toys, her heart was too vexed and troubled to enjoy them. Her nurse's discomfort grew and grew. When bedtime came, she undressed and laid her down, but the child, instead of holding up her little mouth to be kissed, turned away from her and lay still. Then the nurse's heart gave way altogether, and she began to cry. At the sound of her first sob, the princess turned again and held her face to kiss her as usual. But the nurse had her handkerchief to her eyes and did not see the movement. "Nursey," said the princess, "why won't you believe me?" "Because I can't believe you," said the nurse, getting angry again. "Ah, then you can't help it," said Irene, "and I will not be vexed with you any more. I will give you a kiss and go to sleep." "You little angel," cried the nurse, and caught her out of bed and walked about the room with her in her arms, kissing and hugging her. "You will let me take you to see my dear old great big grandmother, won't you?" said the princess, as she laid her head down again. "Oh," said the princess, as she laid her down again. And you won't say I'm ugly any more, will you, princess?" "Nursey, I never said you were ugly. What can you mean?" "Well, if you didn't say it, you meant it." "Indeed, I never did." "You said I wasn't so pretty as that." "As my beautiful grandmother. Yes, I did say that. And I say it again, for it's quite true." "Then I do think you are unkind," said the nurse, and put her handkerchief to her eyes again. "Nursey, dear, everybody can't be as beautiful as every other body, you know. You are very nice looking, but if you had been as beautiful as my grandmother—" "Bother your grandmother," said the nurse. "Nurse, that's very rude. You are not fit to be You are not fit to be spoken to till you can behave better. I love the writing. I love this so much. Star Storytellers here. We're on chapter 4 of The Princess and the Goblin by George MacDonald. Okay, I'm going to back up a bit. Nurse, that's very rude. You are not fit to be spoken to till you can behave better. The princess turned away at once, and again the nurse was ashamed of herself. I'm sure I beg your pardon, princess, she said, though still in an offended tone. But the princess let the tone pass, and heeded only the words. You won't say it again, I am sure, she answered, once more turning towards her nurse. I was only going to say that if you had been twice as nice looking as you are, some king or other would have married you, and then what would have become of me? You are an angel, repeated the nurse, again embracing her. Now, insisted Irene. Excuse me, I had a burp there. Now, insisted Irene, you will come and see my grandmother, won't you? I will go with you anywhere you like, my cherub, she answered, and in 2 minutes the weary little princess was fast asleep. Let's read one more chapter. Who's here? Flyfox Pro, what's all this then? It's storybook time with Uncle Marmaduke fan. We're reading The Princess and the Goblin by George MacDonald. I was reading it. I thought, how old is this book? I Googled it. It's in the public domain. It's in the public domain. I can read it on YouTube. So let's do a recap. We've met Princess Irene. She lives in a castle and rarely sees her father. She's bored because she never gets to go outside because they're scared of the goblins. And when she goes up the stairs to explore, she loses herself and discovers an old lady who is extremely beautiful, but somehow Irene knows that she is indeed very, very old indeed. And the old lady tells her that she is her great-great-grandmother and that Irene is actually named after her great-great-grandmother. When she comes back and tells the nurse refuses to believe her. And Irene is just adorably written. She is intelligent for her age. She's polite like a princess should be. And she's not too intelligent for her age. She's written exactly like an 8-year-old in her dialogue. So it's excellent writing. And we're at chapter 5. The princess lets well alone. Princess Irene is savage, says Star Storyteller. Yes, she is. All right. When she woke the next morning, the first thing she heard was the rain still falling. Indeed, this day was so like the last that it would have been difficult to tell where was the use of it. The first thing she thought of, however, was not the rain, but the lady in the tower, and the first question that occupied her thoughts was whether she should not ask the nurse to fulfill her promise this very morning and go with her to find her grandmother as soon as she had had her breakfast. But she came to the conclusion that perhaps the lady would not be pleased if she took anyone to see her without first asking leave, especially as it was pretty evident, seeing she lived on pigeons' eggs and cooked them herself, that she did not want the household to know she was there. So the princess resolved to take the first opportunity of running up alone and asking whether she might bring her nurse. She believed the fact that she could not otherwise convince her she was telling the truth. She believed the fact that she could not otherwise convince her she was telling the truth would have much weight with her grandmother. The princess and her nurse were the best of friends all dressing time, and the princess, in consequence, ate an enormous little breakfast. As an aside, I love how they use Japanese conventions to characterize some of these things, like the nurse having like the big, cutesy bootsy face and like emphasizing Irene's cuteness in like her mannerisms. Like being a princess is a big part of these stories because little girls especially love princesses, and George MacDonald is deliberately emphasizing that element of it, including some of like the courtliness of princesses. So it's excellent. I wonder, Lootie, that was her pet name for her nurse, what pigeons' eggs taste like, she said, as she was eating her egg. Not quite a common one, for they always picked out the pinky ones for her. We'll get you a pigeon's eggs, and you shall judge for yourself, said the nurse. Oh, no, returned Irene, suddenly reflecting they might disturb the old lady in getting it, and that, even if they did not, she would have one less in consequence. What a strange creature you are, said the nurse, first to want a thing, and then to refuse it. But she did not say it crossly, and the princess never minded any remarks that were not unfriendly. "Well, you see, Ludi, there are reasons," she returned, and said no more, for she did not want to bring up the subject of her former strife, lest her nurse should offer to go before she had had her grandmother's permission to bring her. Of course she could refuse to take her, but then she would believe her less than ever. Now the nurse, as she said herself afterwards, could not be every moment in the room, and, as never before yesterday had the princess given her the smallest reason for anxiety, it had not yet come into her head to watch her more closely. So she soon gave her a chance, and, the very first that offered, Irene was off and up the stairs again. This day's adventure, however, did not turn out like yesterday's, although it began like it, and indeed today is very seldom like yesterday, if people would note the differences, even when it rains. The princess ran through passage after passage and could not find the stair of the tower. My own suspicion is that she had not gone up high enough, and was searching on the second instead of the third floor. When she turned to go back, she failed equally in her search after the stair. She was lost once more. Something made it even worse to bear this time, and it was no wonder that she cried again. Suddenly it occurred to her that it was after having cried before that she had found her grandmother's stair. She got up at once, wiped her eyes, and started upon a fresh quest. This time, although she did not find what she hoped, she found what was next best. She did not come on a stair that went up, but she came upon one that went down. It was evidently not the stair she had come up, yet it was a good deal better than none. So down she went, and was singing merrily before she reached the bottom. There, to her surprise, she found herself in the kitchen. Although she was not allowed to go there alone, her nurse had often taken her, and she was a great favorite with the servants. So there was a general rush at her the moment she appeared, for everyone wanted to have her, and the report of where she was soon reached the nurse's ears. She came at once to fetch her, but she never suspected how she had got there, and the princess kept her own counsel. Her failure to find the old lady not only disappointed her, but made her very thoughtful. Sometimes she came almost to the nurse's opinion that she had dreamed all about it. But that fancy never lasted very long. She wondered much whether she should ever see her again, and thought it very sad not to have been able to find her when she particularly wanted her. She resolved to say nothing more to her nurse on the subject, seeing it was so little in her power to prove her words. Let's read one more chapter. Chapter 6. So we'll do divisions of 6. The Little Miner. Some quick comments. Okay, again, the artists are very good at picking up at cues, like the kitchen staff loving her and finding her adorable, and even adding some like comedic whimsy with some exaggerated expressions. That's great. It's another great chapter for MacDonald. He's consistently being conversational. I want to see if I can find the line. When he talks about how today is very different than yesterday, he's sort of commenting. It's sort of like I set up for a joke, because his first joke is that, well, what business does today have being like yesterday with all the rain? Why can't we have great days every day, right? So the setup is, oh man, it's raining, that stinks. And then his commentary for the child is to think about how you don't have to be depressed about how today seems like yesterday, even if it's raining, if you start looking for the differences. So he's teaching children about having a proper attitude, but he's doing it by contextualizing the story for them. He's not kind of like coming out from behind the curtain and saying, all right, kids, here's your moral lesson. He's just very naturally working it in. The Little Miner, Chapter 6. The next day, the great clouds still hung over the mountain, and the rain poured like water from a full sponge. The princess was very fond of being out of doors, and she nearly cried when she saw that the weather was no better. But the mist was not of such a dark, dingy gray. There was light in it, and as the hours went on, it grew brighter and brighter until it was almost too bright to look at. And late in the afternoon, the sun broke out so gloriously that Irene clapped her hands, crying, see, Ludi, the sun has had his face washed. Look how bright he is. Do get my hat and let us go out for a walk. Oh dear, how happy I am." Ludi was very glad to please the princess. She got her hat and cloak, and they set out together for a walk up the mountain, for the road was so hard and steep that the water could not rest upon it, and it was always dry enough for walking a few minutes after the rain ceased. The clouds were rolling away in broken pieces, like great over-woolly sheep whose wool the sun had bleached till it was almost too white for the eyes to bear. Between them the sky shone with a deeper and purer blue because of the rain. The trees on the roadside were hung all over with drops, which sparkled in the sun like jewels. The only things that were no brighter for the rain were the brooks that ran down the mountain. They had changed from the clearness of crystal to a muddy brown. But what they lost in color they gained in sound, or at least in noise, for a brook, when it is swollen, is not so musical as before. But Irene was in raptures with the great brown streams tumbling down everywhere, and Ludi shared in her delight, for she too had been confined to the house for 3 days. At length she observed that the sun was getting low, and said it was time to be going back. She made the remark again and again, but every time the princess begged her to go on just a little farther and a little farther, reminding her that it was much easier to go downhill, and saying that when they did turn, they would be at home in a moment. So on and on they did go, now to look at a group of ferns over whose tops a stream was pouring in a watery arch, now to pick a shining stone from a rock by the wayside, now to watch the flight of some bird. Suddenly, the shadow of a great mountain peak came up from behind and shot in front of them. When the nurse saw it, she started and shook, and catching hold of the princess's hand, turned and began to run down the hill. "What's all the haste, Nursey?" asked Irene, running alongside her. "We must not be out a moment longer." "But we can't help being out a good many moments longer." It was too true. The nurse almost cried. They were much too far from home. It was against express orders to be out with the princess 1 moment after the sun was down, and they were nearly a mile up the mountain. If His Majesty, Irene's papa, were to hear of it, Ludi would certainly be dismissed, and to leave the princess would break her heart. It was no wonder she ran, but Irene was not in the least frightened, not knowing anything to be frightened at. She kept on chattering as well as she could, but it was not easy. Ludi, why do you run so fast? It shakes my teeth when I talk." "Then don't talk," said Ludi. The princess went on talking. She was always saying, look, Ludi," but Ludi paid no more heed to anything she said, only ran on. Look, Ludi, don't you see that funny man peeping over the rock?" Ludi only ran the faster. They had to pass the rock, and when they came nearer, the princess saw it was only a lump of rock itself that she had taken for a man. Look, Ludi, there's such a curious creature at the foot of that old tree. Look at it, Ludi, it's making faces at us, I do think." Ludi gave a stifled cry and ran faster still, so fast that Irene's little legs could not keep up with her, and she fell with a crash. It was a hard, downhill road, and she had been running so very fast, so it was no wonder she began to cry. This put the nurse nearly beside herself, but all she could do was to run on the moment she got the princess on her feet again. "Who's that laughing at me?" said the princess, trying to keep in her sobs and running too fast for her grazed knees. "Nobody, child," said the nurse, almost angrily. But that instant there came a burst of coarse tittering from somewhere near, and a hoarse, indistinct voice that seemed to say, "Lies, lies, lies!" "Oh!" cried the nurse with a sigh that was almost a scream, and ran on faster than ever. "Nursey, Ludi, I can't run any more. Do let us walk a bit." "What am I to do?" said the nurse. "Here, I will carry you." She caught her up, but found her much too heavy to run with, and had to set her down again. Then she looked wildly about her, gave a great cry, and said, "We've taken a wrong turn somewhere, and I don't know where we are. We are lost! Lost!" The terror she was in had quite bewildered her. It was true enough that they had lost the way. They had been running down into a little valley in which there was no house to be seen. Now Irene did not know what good reason there was for her nurse's terror, for the servants had all strict orders never to mention the goblins to her. But it was very discomposing to see her nurse in such a fright. Before, however, she had time to grow thoroughly alarmed like her, she heard the sound of whistling, and that revived her. Presently, she saw a boy coming up the road from the valley to meet them. He was the whistler, but before they met, his whistling changed to singing. And this is something like what he sang. I'm not going to try to sing this because I carry my tunes in a bucket. Ring, dod, bang, go the hammers clang, hit and turn and bore, whiz and puff and roar. Thus we rive the rocks, force the goblin locks, see the shining ore. 1, 2, 3, bright as gold can be. 4, 5, 6, shovels, mattocks, picks. 7, 8, 9, light your lamp at mine. 10, 11, 12, loosely hold the helve. We're the merry miner boys, make the goblins hold their noise. I wish you would hold your noise, said the nurse rudely, for the very word goblin at such a time and in such a place made her tremble. It would bring the goblins upon them to a certainty, she thought, to defy them in that way. But whether the boy heard her or not, he did not stop his singing. I love this. So in this illustration, they're capturing the atmosphere of the encroaching night and the goblins in the distance, the little eyes. The nurse is comedically over the top. 13, 14, 15, this is worth the sifting. 16, 17, 18, there's the match and lay it in. 19, 20, goblins in a plenty. Do be quiet, said the nurse. In a whispered shriek. Do be quiet, cried the nurse in a whispered shriek. But the boy, who was now close at hand, still went on. Hush, shush, scurry. There you go, in a hurry. Gobble, gobble, gobble. There you go, a-wobbling. Hobble, hobble, hobbling. Cobble, cobble, cobbling. Hob, bob, goblin. Wha! There, said the boy, and he stood still opposite them. There, that'll do for them. They can't bear singing, and they can't stand that song. They can't sing themselves, for they have no more voice than a crow, and they don't like other people to sing. The boy was dressed in a miner's dress, with a curious cap on his head. He was a very nice-looking boy, with eyes as dark as the mines in which he worked, and as sparkling as the crystals in their rocks. He was almost 12 years old. His face was almost too pale for beauty, which came of his being so little in the open air and the sunlight, for even vegetables grown in the dark are white. But he looked happy, merry indeed, perhaps at the thought of having routed the goblins, and his bearing as he stood before them had nothing clownish or rude about them. I saw them, he went on, as I came up, and I'm very glad I did. I knew they were after somebody, but I couldn't see who it was. They won't touch you, so long as I'm with you. Why, who are you? Asked the nurse, offended at the freedom with which he spoke to them. I'm Peter's son. Who's Peter? Peter the miner. I don't know him. I'm his son, though. And why should the goblins mind you, pray? Because I don't mind them. I'm used to them. What difference does that make? If you're not afraid of them, they're afraid of you. I'm not afraid of them. That's all. But it's all that's wanted, up here, that is. It's a different thing down there. They won't always mind that song, even down there. And if anyone sings it, they start grinning at him awfully. And if he gets frightened and misses a word or says a wrong one, don't they give it to him. What do they do to him? Asked Irene, with a trembling voice. Don't go frightening the princess, said the nurse. The princess, repeated the little miner, taking off his curious cap. I beg your pardon, but you oughtn't to be out so late. Everybody knows that's against the law. Yes, indeed it is, said the nurse, beginning to cry again. Look at her. She even has like an onion head or something. That's hilarious. Who do we have? Dan Hauser, just tuning in. Welcome, Dan. We're reading The Princess and the Goblin by George MacDonald. I'm on chapter 6, I think. And I'm going to call it a night after chapter 6. I am recording this, so I'm going to do an edited version where I edit out the bleeps and bloops, and I'll do a little like unofficial audiobook of it. But it's wonderful so far. And I shall have to suffer for it. What does that matter, said the boy. It must be your fault. It is the princess who will suffer for it. I hope they didn't hear you call her the princess. If they did, they're sure to know her again. They're awfully sharp. Ludi, Ludi, cried the princess, take me home. Don't go on like that, said the nurse to the boy, almost fiercely. How could I help it? I've lost my way. You shouldn't have been out so late. You wouldn't have lost your way if you hadn't been frightened, said the boy. Come along. I'll soon set you right again. Shall I carry your little highness? Impertinence, murmured the nurse. Impertinence, murmured the nurse. But she did not say it aloud, for she thought if she made him angry, he might take his revenge by telling someone belonging to the house, and then it would be sure to come to the king's ears. No, thank you, said Irene. I can walk very well, though I can't run so fast as Nursey. If you will give me one hand, Ludi, Ludi will give me another, and then I shall get on famously. They soon had her between them, holding a hand of each. Now, let's run, said the nurse. No, no, said the little miner. That's the worst thing you can do. If you hadn't run before, you would not have lost your way. And if you run now, they will be after you in a moment. I don't want to run, said Irene. You don't think of me, said the nurse. Yes, I do, Ludi. The boy says they won't touch us if we don't run. Yes, but if they know at the house that I've kept you out so late, I shall be turned away, and that would break my heart. Turned away, Ludi? Who would turn you away? Your papa, child. But I'll tell him it was all my fault, and you know it was, Ludi. He won't mind that. I'm sure he won't. Then I'll cry, and go down on my knees to him, and beg him not to take away my own dear Ludi. The nurse was comforted at hearing this, but said no more. They went on, walking pretty fast, but taking care not to run a step. I want to talk to you, said Irene to the little miner, but it's so awkward. I don't know your name. My name's Curdy, little princess. What a funny name. Curdy. What more? Curdy Peterson. What's your name, please? Irene. What more? I don't know what more. What more is my name, Ludi? Princesses haven't got more than one name. They don't want it. Oh. Then, Curdy, you must call Irene. Then, Curdy, you must call me just Irene and no more. No, indeed, said the nurse indignantly. He shall do no such thing. I love her. Look at how they draw her. That's great. What shall he call me? What shall he call me then, Ludi? Your Royal Highness. My Royal Highness? What's that? No, no, Ludi. I won't be called names. I don't like them. You told me once yourself that it's only rude children that call names, and I'm sure Curdy won't be rude. Curdy, my name's Irene. Well, Irene, said Curdy with a glance at the nurse, which showed he enjoyed teasing her, it is very kind of you to let me call you anything. I like your name very much. I love this. This is great. Okay, so the artist is picking... There's so much balance to the characters. Ludi is an overbearing nurse, right? Which is a character flaw. But she loves Irene, sincerely. So she has balance to her character. She's overprotective and a little bit selfish in her motherliness. Curdy is very brash, bold, sensible, and knowledgeable. He knows that if he's brave and doesn't show fear, the goblins will leave him alone. But he's not going to be an idiot and put himself into a situation where he can't handle the goblins. So he understands the big, bad, dangerous world that Irene has been kept from. So there's a not just a class conflict, but also a character conflict between the two of them, where Curdy is sort of like the adventurous wild world that Irene's been missing out on. Hey, Lobsters, eh? All that Jordan Peterson stuff. Who's here? Marm says, I have so many questions. You know, it's kind of incredible to see these. Classic books that have an anime-style drawings in them. Yes, I love these. I'm going to collect all of these books. This is the only one I found in English so far. The others I've collected may only be in Japanese, but as I collect them, I'll continue to show them off as I go. He expected the nurse to interfere again, but he soon saw that she was too frightened to speak. She was staring at something a few yards before them in the middle of the path, where it narrowed between rocks so that only one could pass at a time. "It is very much kinder of you to go out of your way to take us home," said Irene. "I'm not going out of my way yet," said Curdie. "It's on the other side of those rocks the paths turn off to my father's." "You wouldn't think of leaving us till we're safe home, I'm sure." "Oh, the nurse. You wouldn't think of leaving us till we're safe home, I'm sure," gasped the nurse. "Of course not," said Curdie. You dear, good, kind Curdie. I'll give you a kiss when we get home," said the princess. The nurse gave her a great pull by the hand she held, but at that instant the something in the middle of the way, which had looked like a great lump of earth brought down by the rain, began to move. One after another, it shot out 4 long things, like 2 arms and 2 legs, but it was now too dark to tell what they were. The nurse began to tremble from head to foot. Irene clasped Curdie's hand yet faster, and Curdie began to sing again. I love the artist. The artist even picked up on lines like how it was so dark you couldn't tell what was arms and what was legs, so you kind of drew it as a big black ball, and again, comedically over-the-top expressions for the nurse. They're picking up on subtext in the book and bringing that out comedically in the illustrations to help a young audience connect with it. This is fantastic. 1, 2, hit and hew. 3, 4, blast and bore. 5, 6, there's a fix. 7, 8, hold it straight. 9, 10, hit again. Hurry, scurry, brother smother. There's a toad in the road. Smash it, squash it, fry it, dry it. You're another, up and off. There's enough. Ha! He uttered the last 2 words. Curdie let go of his hold of his companion and rushed at the thing in the road as if he would trample it under his feet. It gave a great spring and ran straight up one of the rocks like a huge spider. Curdie turned back, laughing, and took Irene's hand again. She grasped his very tight, but said nothing till they had passed the rocks. A few yards more, and she found herself on part of the road she knew and was able to speak again. "Do you know, Curdie, I don't quite like your song. It sounds to me rather rude," she said. "Well, perhaps it is," answered Curdie. I never thought of that. It's the way we have. We do it because they don't like it." "Who don't like it?" "The Cobbs, as we call them." "Don't," said the nurse. "Why not?" said Curdie. "I beg you won't. Please don't." "Oh, if you ask me that way, of course I won't, though I don't know a bit why. Look, there are the lights of your great house down below. You'll be at home in 5 minutes now." Nothing more happened. They reached home in safety. Nobody had missed them, or even known they had gone out, and they had arrived at the door belonging to their part of the house without anyone seeing them. The nurse was rushing in with a hurried and not over-gracious good night to Curdie, but the princess pulled her hand from hers, and was just throwing her arms round Curdie's neck when she caught her again and dragged her away. Ludi, I promised a kiss," cried Irene. "A princess mustn't give kisses. It's not at all proper," said Ludi. "But I promised," said the princess. "There's no occasion. He's only a minor boy." "He's a good boy and a brave boy, and he has been very kind to us." Ludi, I promised." "Then you shouldn't have promised." "Ludi, I promised him a kiss." "Your Royal Highness," said Ludi, suddenly grown very respectful, "must come in directly." "Nurse, a princess must not break her word," said Irene, drawing herself up and standing stock still. Ludi did not know which the king might count the worst. Misspoke, I'm getting tired. Ludi did not know which the king might count the worst, to let the princess be out after sunset or to let her kiss a minor boy. She did not know that, being a gentleman, as many kings have been, he would have counted neither of them the worse. However much he might have disliked his daughter to kiss the minor boy, he would not have had her break her word for all the goblins in creation. But, as I say, the nurse was not lady enough to understand this, and she was in a great difficulty, for, if she insisted, someone might hear the princess cry and run to see, and then all would come out. But here Curdie came again to the rescue. "Never mind, Princess Irene," he said. "You mustn't kiss me tonight, but you shan't break your word. I will come another time, and you may be sure I will." "Oh, thank you, Curdie," said the princess, and stopped crying. "Good night, Irene. Good night, Looney," said Curdie, and turned and was out of sight in a moment. "I should like to see him." "Oh, I should like to see him," muttered the nurse, as she carried the princess to the nursery. "You will see him, Irene. You may be sure. Curdie will keep his word. He's sure to come again." "I should like to see him," repeated the nurse, and said no more. She did not want to open a new cause of strife with the princess by saying more plainly what she meant. Glad enough that she had succeeded both in getting home unseen and in keeping the princess from kissing the miner's boy, she resolved to watch her far better in future. Her carelessness had already doubled the danger she was in. Formerly, the goblins were her only fear. Now she had to protect her charge from Curdie as well. This is fantastic. So, narratively, I love that there's a clear class division between Curdie and Irene, and she's too young to understand class divisions. Irene, her princessness comes about in her poise and her grace and her self-control. She's remarkably mature for a child her age, and clearly part of this is her princess upbringing. You tell princess stories to little girls to show them this sort of remarkable poise and self-control and self-discipline, really, despite her extreme youth and lack of understanding of anything. Curdie is, a rough around the edges kid, kind of sings a rude song to the princess of the realm, but he sings it because that's what they need to do to take care of goblins. He has knowledge of the world that she doesn't have. He's rough and dangerous and a little uncouth. So, fantastic. This is so good. All right, I'm going to call it there because it's getting a little late. Thanks for everybody who joined the chat. I think I'll keep doing little live stream, kind of like just informal, very informal. There are actually like nice audiobooks of this if you want to get a real nice professional audiobook of it. I'm just going to be reading this for fun and, doing the voices and commenting on the art as I go. So the edition is The Princess and the Goblin, published by 7 Seas Entertainment. I don't think it's available in many bookstores in America, but if you go searching for it, you might be able to find a seller who will ship to the United States. And I'm really impressed by the illustration quality. I mean, it is doing some like creative departure from the text of the book, but it's only adding some little comedic and cartoon elements, I think, that will add to the appeal of it for younger readers, maybe help them connect with, it can be hard for young readers to connect with old British books if they don't understand the culture or the context. So I think giving them illustrations like this would be a nice little, give the kid something they can latch onto to get them into the world of the book. I'm a big advocate of quality illustrations in books, and this is definitely that. All right, we're going to call it there. I'm going to have to I'm using my completely unprofessional setup.